The city had long forgotten about the stretch of concrete beneath the I-95 overpass. To most drivers speeding overhead, it was just a shade-o blur of graffiti, rusted shopping carts, and tangled blankets. But to the boy, it was home. Not the kind you see in storybooks or TV shows, but the kind you make when there's nowhere else to go. He wasn't old enough to drive, barely tall enough to reach the school water fountain without tiptoeing. Yet he'd already learned how to read people's eyes, the ones that looked right through him, the ones that narrowed in suspicion, and the rare few that held a flicker of something softer, something like pity. He didn't like pity. He'd rather be invisible. Every morning, just before the sun poked through the smog, he'd fold the thin sleeping bag his mom kept, wrapped around her like armor, tuck their few belongings into a worn duffel, and head toward the bus stop 3 blocks east. Not to catch a bus, he couldn't afford the fare, but because that's where the free breakfast van parked. 2 days a week, if he got there early enough, he could get a carton of milk and a banana wrapped in crinkled plastic. On good days, there'd be oatmeal cups. He'd eat one slowly, savoring the warmth, and save the other for his mom. She hadn't been sleeping much lately. Her breathing came in short, wheezy bursts, like a balloon slowly losing air. The cough had gotten worse since the weather turned cold. He walked with his head down but his ears open. He knew which alleys echoed too loudly. Storefronts had motion sensor lights that scared off stray dogs, which laundromats let people sit in the folding chairs, even if they weren't doing laundry. The Blue Breeze laundromat was his favorite. The owner, an older woman with silver hair and kind eyes, never shooed him away. Sometimes she'd even give him a dry towel to wipe his face, or let him warm his hands near the dryers. Today he wasn't there for warmth. He was there because it was raining light at first, then harder, and the overpass offered no real shelter from sideways rain. Plus his sneakers were soaked through and his socks squished with every step. He needed to dry off before school, or the nurse would notice and start asking questions he didn't want to answer. Inside, the laundromat hummed with the steady rhythm of spinning machines. A few people sat along the back wall, waiting. An old man nodded off in a plastic chair, newspaper draped over his chest. 2 teenagers scrolled on their phones, ignoring the world. And near the soda machine, an elderly woman sat hunched over, her hands trembling as she dug through a cloth purse. Her eyes were redrimmed, and her breath hitched in little gasps. The boy paused near the door, water dripping from his sleeves onto the linoleum floor. He didn't mean to stare. But something about her stillness, like she'd been carved from grief, caught his attention. Then he saw it. On the floor near the base of the soda machine, half hidden under a crumpled receipt, was a small brown wallet. It wasn't flashy, just worn leather with a frayed strap. He glanced around. No one else seemed to notice. The woman was still rummaging, her fingers fumbling with zippers and pockets, her breathing growing more frantic. He recognized that panic. He'd felt it himself the week his mom's inhaler went missing, how your chest tightens not just from fear, but from the helplessness of losing something you can't replace. He should have walked away. That was the rule. Mind your own business, keep your head low, don't draw attention. But the wallet looked so small against the cold tile, and the woman looked so broken. Without thinking, he stepped forward, picked it up, and held it out. "Ma'am?" His voice was quiet, almost lost under the whir of a dryer. She looked up, startled, her eyes watery and confused. "I think this is yours," he said, holding it gently, like it might crumble in his hands. For a second she just stared at him, then at the wallet, then back at his face. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Then slowly she reached for it. When her fingers brushed his, they were ice-cold. "Oh my goodness," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Oh, child." "Thank you." She opened it right there, flipping through cards, checking a folded bill, touching a faded photo tucked inside. Tears spilled over. This had my rent money and my medicine list. I don't know what I would have done. She looked at him fully nowned, through him, not past him, but at him. "What's your name?" He hesitated. Giving his name felt dangerous, like handing over a piece of himself he couldn't get back. But her eyes were so full of gratitude, so warm, that he whispered, Just call me kid. She smiled through her tears. Well, kid, you've got the heart of an angel. She reached into the wallet, pulled out a $5 bill, and tried to press it into his palm. He shook his head fast. No, ma'am, I don't need it, but you must. I really don't, he said, stepping back. He wasn't lying. He did need it badly. That $5 could buy 2 meals, maybe even a used pair of socks from the thrift store. But something inside him refused. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was the quiet voice his mom always used when she said, "Doing right don't always pay, but it keeps you clean inside," whatever it was. He turned and walked toward the door before she could insist. Outside, the rain had softened to a mist. He pulled his thin jacket tighter and started the long walk toward school. His feet were still wet, his stomach still empty, and his mom was still coughing back under the overpass. Nothing had changed. And yet something had. For the first time in weeks, he didn't feel entirely invisible. Someone had seen him. Not as a problem, not as a nuisance, not as a statistic, but as a person who chose to do the right thing. Even when no one was watching, he didn't know it yet. But that small actra, turning a stranger's wallet with nothing asked in return, would echo farther than he ever imagined. It would travel through neighborhood meetings, ride on police radios, to land on the desk of an officer who'd spent years enforcing rules without always questioning them. But for now, all he knew was the chill in his bones, the ache in his belly, and the quiet warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the laundromat's dryers. He passed a corner store, where kids his age bought sodas and chips with crumpled bills from their parents' wallets. He didn't envy them, not exactly. He just wondered what it felt like to not have to count every penny, to not have to calculate whether walking an extra mile saved enough bus fare to buy cough syrup. He kicked a pebble down the sidewalk, watching it bounce off cracked concrete. School would start in 20 minutes. He'd be late again. The principal would sigh, the teacher would mark him absent for the morning session, and the social worker might stop by his classroom just to check in. He hated those visits. They always asked too many questions, and their eyes always held that same look like. They were already writing his future in their notebooks before he'd even lived it. But today, for some reason, he didn't feel as heavy. Maybe it was the woman's words, heart of an angel, ringing in his ears like a secret promise. Or maybe it was just knowing that, for a few seconds, he'd been more than the homeless kid. He'd been someone who helped. Someone who mattered. He rounded the block, hands shoved deep in his pockets, shoulders slightly less slumped. The school loomed ahead, its brick walls stained with years of city grime. He took a breath, squared his thin frame, and walked through the gates not with hope. Exactly. But with a quiet kind of dignity that no storm, no hunger, no system could take from him. Not yet. And miles away, in a small apartment above a hardware store, that same elderly woman sat at her kitchen table, the returned wallet open before her. She picked up her landline phone, dialed a number she'd had memorized for years, and said, "Miguel? It's Rosa. You remember that community meeting tonight? I've got a story you need to hear." 2 days after the laundromat, the boy was back under the overpass, trying to light a small camp stove with stiff fingers. The rain had stopped, but the air still held that damp chill that seeped into your bones and refused to leave. His mom was curled up in their sleeping bag, wrapped in an old comforter someone had left at a donation bin. She hadn't spoken much that morning, just coughed, shallow breaths that sounded like rustling paper. He kept checking on her between boiling water for instant noodles, its eyes darting to her chest to make sure it still rose and fell. He didn't think much about the wallet anymore. It had been a small moment, quick and quiet. Already buried under the weight of the day's new worries, would the grocery store let him collect bottles from their dumpster again? Would the school nurse call social services if he showed up with wet shoes one more time? Would his mom be well enough to walk to the free clinic next week? But somewhere else in the city, that moment hadn't been forgotten. At the community center on 5th and Elm, a neighborhood meeting was wrapping up. Folding chairs scraped against linoleum, coffee cups were tossed into trash bins, and people exchanged tired goodbyes. One man lingered near the back tall, broad-shouldered, in a dark blue uniform with a badge clipped to his belt. He wasn't there in full cop mode. No radio crackling, no stern posture. Just a man in his late 40s listening. An older woman, Rosa, with silver hair and warm eyes, approached him as others filed out. "Officer," she said, voice low but urgent, "can I talk to you for a minute?" He nodded. Of course. She told him about the laundromat, about losing her wallet, about panic setting in, about how she'd nearly given up until a boy, no older than 10, thin as a pencil, with eyes too old for his face, walked over and handed it back. Didn't ask for anything, she said. Wouldn't take a dime. Just did the right thing. The officer listened, his expression unreadable at first. Then his eyebrows softened. "You get a good look at him?" "Yeah," she said. "He's been around that overpass near the old tire shop. Lives there with his mama. I've seen him before, always quiet, always respectful. Never causes trouble." The officer didn't say much after that. Just thanked her, jotted down a few notes in a small notepad, and promised he'd look into it. But as he walked back to his cruiser, something sat heavy in his chest. He'd patrolled that overpass area before. He'd seen the encampments, the makeshift tents, the people who'd fallen through every crack in the system. And like most cops, he'd been trained to see them as problems, nuisances, potential threats, things to be moved along. He'd done it himself. "You can't stay here. Move along. This isn't a campsite, but this was different. A child living in the dirt, still choosing kindness. It didn't fit the script. It didn't fit the narrative he'd been fed. That poverty and desperation always led to selfishness. That survival meant looking out for number one. Yet here was proof that wasn't true. The next morning, before his shift officially started, he drove slowly past the overpass. He parked a block away, walked the rest on foot, trying not to look like he was on duty. He didn't wear his hat. He left his radio in the car. He just wanted to see. And there he was, kneeling by a small pot, stirring something that smelled faintly of broth. The boy looked up when he heard footsteps, and his whole body tensed. Not fear, exactly, but alertness. The kind of watchfulness you develop when the world has taught you that adults in uniform usually bring bad news. The officer stopped a few yards away. "Hey," he said, gentle, like you'd speak to a startled bird. "Mind if I sit for a minute?" The boy didn't answer right away. He glanced toward the sleeping bag where his mom stirred slightly, then back at the officer. He gave a tiny nod. The officer lowered himself onto a concrete ledge, careful not to get his pants dirty, then realized how silly that was, and shook his head. "Sorry," he said, almost to himself. "Habit." He pulled a granola bar from his jacket pocket, plain oats and honey. Nothing fancy, and held it out. "You hungry?" The boy hesitated. He looked at the bar, then at the officer's face, searching for a trick, a catch. Finding none, he reached out slowly and took it. "Thanks," he mumbled. They sat in silence for a while. The officer didn't ask for a name, didn't ask where his dad was, or why they were living here. He just watched the steam rise from the pot, listened to the distant hum of traffic overhead. "You go to school?" he finally asked. "Yeah," the boy said, "when I can." "What do you like about it?" The boy thought for a second. "The library. They've got books about space, and oceans, and stuff you can't see unless you look real close." The officer smiled faintly. "Sounds like a good place." "It is," the boy said, then added quietly, "if you're clean enough to go in." The words landed like a stone in water. The officer didn't flinch, but something inside him cracked open. This kid wasn't complaining. He was just stating a fact, like saying the sky is gray or the bus runs late. "And that made it worse? Your mom's sick?" he asked, nodding toward the sleeping bag. "Yeah, her lungs. Gets worse when it's cold." The officer nodded. He knew that story too. No insurance. No ID. No way into the system unless you hit rock bottom, and even then, the help came with so many strings you could strangle on them. "You ever need anything?" he asked carefully. "Like food? Blankets? Someone to talk to?" The boy looked down at his hands, now picking at the wrapper of the granola bar. "We're okay," he said. But his voice was thin, stretched tight like a fraying rope. The officer didn't push. He just reached into his other pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, a phone number scribbled in neat handwriting. If you ever need help, and I'm not around, call this lady. Her name's Ms. Lane. She works with families. She won't ask a lot of questions. Just helps. The boy took the paper, tucked it into his jacket without looking at it. Okay, they sat a little longer. The officer wanted to say, more wanted to promise things. He couldn't guarantee, but he knew empty words meant nothing out here. So instead, he stood slowly. Take care of yourself, he said. You too, the boy replied. And for the first time, his eyes held something besides caution. Maybe curiosity. Maybe the smallest flicker of trust. The officer walked back to his car, but he didn't start the engine right away. He sat with his hands on the wheel, staring at the overpass in his rearview mirror. He thought about his own kids' warm beds, full pantries, soccer practice on Tuesdays. He thought about how easy it was to forget that not every child got to live in that world. That night, he couldn't sleep. He kept replaying the boy's face, the way he held the granola bar like it was precious, the way he said we're okay like it was a shield. He remembered the reports he'd filed over the years. Transient minor.
Unattended.
Potential truancy. Cold words for a real. Breathing childhood returned a stranger's wallet with nothing to gain. He got up, made coffee at 3 a.m. and sat at his kitchen table with a legal pad. He didn't know what he was writing at first. Just thoughts, questions. What happens to kids like him? Who's supposed to look out for them? And why does the system only show up when it's time to take them away, not when they still have someone to hold on to? By dawn, he'd made a decision. He couldn't just walk away. Not this time. Over the next few days, he started making calls, quiet ones. He reached out to a social worker he trusted, someone who didn't just follow protocol but actually cared. He asked about housing programs for families experiencing homelessness, about emergency medical assistance, about school enrollment for kids without permanent addresses. Most answers came back the same. It's complicated. There's a waiting list. He'd need a guardian to apply. He also started visiting the overpass more often, not in uniform, not on duty, just as a man with extra gloves or a thermos of soup. The boy grew less wary. Sometimes they'd sit and talk about astronomy or the best way to keep shoes dry in the rain. Once the boy showed him how to spot edible dandelions near the bike path. My grandma taught me, he said. Said they're medicine if you know how to use them. His mom woke up more during those visits. She'd sit up, wrapped in blankets, and offer the officer weak smiles. She didn't say much. Her voice was too rough from coughing, but her eyes said, "Thank you." And the officer understood. He wasn't there to fix everything. He was just present. And for people who'd been ignored for so long, that meant something. Then, one afternoon, everything changed. The officer got a call from the school. A nurse had reported concerns the boy hadn't been in class for 3 days. His teacher said he looked underweight and exhausted, and there were rumors he was living in unsafe conditions. Child Protective Services had been notified. An investigation was opening. His stomach dropped. He knew how this went. CPS would come. They'd see the overpass, the lack of running water, the thin blankets, the sick mother, and they'd call it neglect. Not because anyone was being cruel, but because the system didn't know how to handle survival. They'd take the boy, place him in a group home miles away, cut him off from the only person he had left. He drove to the overpass faster than he should have. When he got there, a white van with agency logos was already parked nearby. 2 caseworkers stood with notepads, talking quietly. The boy stood beside his mom, gripping her hand, eyes wide with the kind of fear that doesn't make a sound. The officer didn't identify himself at first. He just walked up slowly, nodded at the caseworkers. "Afternoon," he said. "Mind if I speak with them for a moment?" One of them frowned, but stepped back. "We're in the middle of an assessment." "I know," he said. "Just 2 minutes." He knelt so he was eye level with the boy. "Hey," he said softly. "It's gonna be okay." The boy didn't cry. He just nodded, jaw tight. The officer turned to the mom. "I'm working on something," he whispered. "Hold on. Just hold on a little longer." She squeezed his arm weakly, her eyes full of tears. She didn't have the strength to shed. That night, the officer didn't go home. He sat in his parked cruiser outside the community center, drafting a petition. Not as a cop, not as part of his job. As a human being who'd seen something worth protecting, he wrote about the boy's character, about his honesty, about his care for his mother, about how, in a world that had given him nothing, he still chose to give back. He wrote that removing him from his only stable relationship, his mother would do more harm than good. And then with hands that shook just slightly, he added the most shocking line of all: I am willing to provide temporary guardianship and a safe home for this child, under court supervision to prevent unnecessary separation. He knew it would stir things up. Cops didn't do this. Not in his department. Not ever. Some would call it reckless. Others would say he was overstepping. But as he sealed the envelope the next morning, he felt something he hadn't in years. Clarity. Because sometimes doing your job means more than enforcing laws. Sometimes it means seeing a child not as a case file, but as a person and choosing to act like one yourself. The morning started like any other. Gray light seeping through the gaps in the overpass. The distant groan of semis on the highway above, the smell of damp concrete and yesterday's rain. The boy stirred before his mom did, already awake, already listening. He'd learned to read the city's rhythms like a language. The clang of the recycling truck at 6:15. The footsteps of the early joggers at 6:40. The hum of the school bus passing 3 blocks over at 7:05. Today, something was off. The air felt tighter, heavier like before a storm, except the sky was clear. He sat up slowly, careful not to jostle the sleeping bag. His mom's breathing was shallow but steady, her face turned toward the thin blanket they used as a curtain against the wind. He checked the small pot they'd used for soup last night still, half full of cold broth. Good. She'd need it when she woke. Then he heard it, the low rumble of an unfamiliar engine, slowing down. Not a delivery truck. Not a regular. He peeked around the edge of their tarp shelter just as a white van with dark-tinted windows rolled to a stop at the edge of the underpass. 2 people stepped out, one in a navy blue blazer, the other in a gray coat, both holding clipboards. They scanned the area with that look he knew too well, professional concern masking. Judgment. His stomach dropped. He didn't move. Didn't breathe. Just watched as they walked toward them, boots crunching on broken glass and gravel. He wanted to wake his mom, but he didn't dare. She needed every minute of rest she could get. Hello? The woman in the blazer called out, her voice calm but firm. Is someone here? The boy stood slowly, brushing dirt from his jeans. Yeah. She approached, her eyes softening slightly when she saw how small he was. Are you? She checked her clipboard. Are you staying here with your mother? He nodded. Is she awake? Not yet. The man in gray stepped forward. We're from Child and Family Services. We've got a report from your school. They're worried about you. The boy didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. Worry never helped anyone. It just led to questions, and questions led to forms, and forms led to strangers taking you away. Can we speak with her? The woman asked gently. He turned and knelt by his mom's side. Ma, he whispered, touching her shoulder lightly. There's people here. From the school. Her eyes fluttered open. Confusion, then recognition, then fear. She tried to sit up, coughing into her sleeve. What's going on? The caseworkers introduced themselves, explained why they were there, the missed school days, the nurses' concerns, the unsafe living conditions. They didn't say it like they were angry. They said it like they were doing their job. And maybe they were, but their job felt like a wall closing in. We're not accusing you of anything, the woman said, crouching to be at eye level. But we have to make sure he's safe, stable, healthy. He is, his mom said, voice hoarse but firm. He's got me. I know, the woman said. And you're clearly doing your best. But the system has rules. And right now, this isn't considered a safe environment for a child. The boy looked down at his shoes. One shoelace was untied. He always meant to fix it, but the knot kept coming loose, and he didn't have another pair. "Do you have any family nearby?" the man asked. "Anyone who could take him in, even temporarily?" His mom shook her head. "My sister passed last year. My brother's in another state. No one else." The silence that followed was thick, final. Then the woman said, "We'd like to bring him to a temporary placement. A group home that's licensed, warm, with meals and medical care. You'd be able to visit once you're in stable housing and cleared by a social worker." The boy's heart pounded so hard he could feel it in his throat. A group home. He'd heard kids at school talk about them, how you shared a room with strangers, how the staff changed every few months, how you couldn't keep anything that was really yours. He'd seen the look in their eyes when they said it. Not relief, but resignation. "No," his mom said, clutching his arm. "He stays with me." "I understand," the woman said, her voice gentle but unmoving. "But we have to follow protocol. If we believe a child is at risk, we're required to intervene." "He's not at risk," his mom shot back, her voice cracking. "He's at risk if you take him from me." The boy squeezed her hand. He didn't want to cry. Crying made everything worse, but his eyes burned. Just then, a familiar figure appeared at the edge of the encampment. The officer. He wasn't in uniform today, just jeans, a hoodie, and that same quiet walk. But something in his posture was different, sharper, more certain. He nodded at the caseworkers. "Morning, officer," the woman said, surprised. "We weren't expecting you. I heard you were coming," he said. "I've been in contact with your office." He stepped closer to the boy and his mom but didn't touch them, just stood nearby like a shield. "Before you make any decisions," he said, "I'd like you to consider an alternative." The caseworkers exchanged glances. "I've filed a petition with juvenile court," the officer continued, "requesting temporary guardianship. I'm willing to take him in full supervision, home inspection, background check, the works. He'd stay in the same school district. His mom could visit. It's not permanent. Just until she's back on her feet." The boy looked up at him, stunned. He hadn't expected this. No one ever stepped in. "Not really." The woman from CPS frowned slightly. "That's highly unusual. Officers don't typically, I know," the officer said. "But this situation is unusual too. You saw him return a stranger's wallet when he had nothing. He walks 2 miles to school, even when his shoes are falling apart. He takes care of his mom better than most adults I know. He's not a problem to be moved. He's a kid who deserves a chance to stay connected to the only family he's got." The man in gray shifted uncomfortably. "We appreciate your concern, but the department has procedures. I'm not asking you to break them," the officer said calmly. "I'm asking you to see him. Not just the address he sleeps at, but who he is." For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the wind whistling through the girders above. Then the woman sighed. "We'll note your petition in the file," she said. "But the investigation proceeds. If the court approves your request, we'll adjust. Until then, standard protocol applies." The officer nodded. He knew that meant they still planned to take the boy. Later that afternoon, a different vehicle arrived, a county SUV with official markings. 2 more caseworkers. This time, there was no discussion. "We need to go now," one said gently but firmly. Holding out a hand to the boy, his mom tried to stand, but her legs gave out. She sank back onto the blanket, tears streaming silently down her face. "Please," she whispered. "Just a few more days." The boy hugged her tight, breathing in the scent of her hair, dusty, faintly of lavender soap from a sample packet they'd found. "I'll come back," he whispered. "I promise." She nodded, unable to speak. He stood, took the caseworker's hand, not because he trusted her, because resisting would only make it harder. As they walked toward the SUV, he glanced back once. His mom was watching him, her hand raised in a small wave. He raised his own. The officer stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets, jaw tight. Their eyes met. The boy didn't know what to feel, anger, fear, confusion, but the officer gave him the tiniest nod, like a silent promise. "I'm still here." The ride to the group home was quiet. The caseworker offered him water, a granola bar, asked if he needed to use the bathroom. He shook his head to everything. He just stared out the window as the city blurred past, familiar streets now turning foreign. Like he was leaving his life behind with every mile. The facility was clean. To clean. Bright lights, linoleum floors, rows of doors with numbers instead of names. A woman with a kind face and tired eyes greeted him at the front desk. "We've got a bed for you in room 4B, she said. "You'll share with 2 other boys." Dinner's at 5. He didn't ask questions. He just followed. That night, lying on a narrow bed with stiff sheets, he listened to the other boys breathe. One snored softly. The other tossed and turned, muttering in his sleep. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance. He thought about the overpass, the sound of rain on tarps, his mom's soft humming when she thought he was asleep. The way the stars looked through the gaps in the highway beams. He missed it. Not the cold, not the hunger, but the closeness. The knowing that no matter how hard things got, they were in it together. Back at the precinct, the officer sat alone in his office long after shift end. He'd called the group home, verified the boy had arrived safely. He'd also called the juvenile court clerk, pushing for an emergency hearing. "This isn't just paperwork," he'd said. "This is a kid losing his whole world." He thought about the look on the boy's face as he got into that SUV. Not scared. Not angry. Just hollow. Like someone had already taken something from him that couldn't be given back, and maybe they had. Because in the eyes of the system, homelessness wasn't just about lacking a roof. It was seen as a failure of care proof that a parent couldn't provide. But the officer had seen the truth. Love doesn't need 4 walls. Dignity doesn't require a mailing address. And sometimes the strongest families are the ones holding on with threadbare hands. He picked up his phone again. Dialed Ms. Lane, the woman from the community center. "They took him," he said, voice rough. "Now we've got to move faster." "You will," she said. "The shelter has an opening. Medical outreach is ready to evaluate his mom tomorrow. And I've got a lawyer who owes me a favor." The officer closed his eyes. "Thank you." He stayed at his desk until nearly midnight, drafting affidavits, gathering statements from Rosa at the laundromat, from the school librarian, even from the grocery store manager who'd seen the boy sorting bottles with care, never stealing, always polite. He wasn't just building a case. He was building a bridge back to the boy, back to his mom, back to the idea that doing the right thing shouldn't cost you everything. Meanwhile, in room 4B, the boy stared at the ceiling. He thought about the wallet, about how returning it had felt like the right thing. He never imagined it would lead to this, being separated from his mom, sleeping in a room full of strangers, feeling like his whole life was unraveling because he'd been honest. But then, he remembered the officer's eyes, that quiet nod, that promise without words. Maybe kindness didn't always pay right away. Maybe sometimes it took a while. Maybe sometimes it hurt first, but it still mattered. And as he finally drifted off to sleep, he held on to that thought like a lifeline. Someone saw me. And they didn't look away. The precinct buzzed with a different kind of tension that morning, the usual rush of calls and coffee spills, but a quiet hum of disbelief. Whispers traveled down hallways. Eyes followed the officer as he walked to his desk. Someone had printed out a copy of his petition and left it in the break room with a sticky note that just said, "Really?" He didn't respond. He just made his coffee, sat down, and kept working. But outside the station, the story had already begun to spread. It started with Rosa from the laundromat, who told her church group. They told their neighbors. One neighbor happened to know a reporter who'd been looking for a human interest piece that wasn't about crime or politics. Within 2 days, a short article appeared in the local paper. "Officer seeks to foster a homeless boy who returned stranger's wallet." No dramatic headlines. Just facts. A photo of the overpass, no faces shown. A quote from the officer. He didn't have to do the right thing, but he did. That deserves more than just being moved along. People read it, and they cared. Letters poured into the juvenile court, handwritten notes from teachers, retirees, even kids from the boys' school. He sits with me at lunch when no one else will. One read. He helped me pick up my books when I dropped them, said another. A local bakery owner wrote, he returns bottles from our dumpster every week. Never once asked for food. Just said thank you when I gave him a day-old muffin. The department wasn't happy. Internal Affairs called the officer in for a welfare check, code for explain yourself. His captain sat across from him, arms crossed, face unreadable. You understand this looks? Unusual, the captain said. People are going to wonder if this is personal, or if you're trying to make a statement. I'm not trying to make a statement, the officer replied. I'm trying to keep a kid from being lost in the system. You're a cop, not a social worker. Maybe, the officer said, but I'm also a person, and I saw something worth protecting. The captain sighed. Just know this could affect your standing, your next promotion, your whole reputation. I know, the officer said. Worth it. Meanwhile, in the group home, the boy tried to stay invisible. He ate when they served food. He went to school when the van came to pick him up. He answered questions with nods or one-word replies. He didn't cry, didn't complain, just kept his head down, waiting. He'd overheard the staff talking something about a court hearing next week, about temporary custody options. He didn't dare hope. Hope had a way of hurting more when it didn't come true. But Slane, the woman the officer had told him about, visited him that Saturday. She brought a backpack with clean clothes, a new notebook, and a small stuffed dog she'd found at a thrift store. Thought you might like a friend, she said gently. Sitting beside him on the edge of his bed, he held the dog, running his thumb over its worn ear. Is my mom okay? She's getting help, Ms. Lane said. She's in a medical respite program now. Warm room, nurses, medicine. She asked me to tell you she's fighting. And she's proud of you. The boy looked down. They said, I can't visit unless someone drives me. I know, Ms. Lane said, but that might change soon. He didn't ask how. He just nodded back in the city. Things were moving faster than anyone expected, the juvenile court. Judge known for being tough, but for expedited the hearing. She'd read the petition, the letters, the school records. She'd even called the laundromat owner herself. I don't usually get involved in these, she told her clerk. But when a 10-year-old returns a wallet with rent money inside while living under a bridge, that's not just good behavior, that's character. The hearing was set for Thursday. Small courtroom. No cameras. Just lawyers, caseworkers, the officer, and the boy. Brought in by a court liaison, the boy wore the clean jeans Ms. Lane had brought him. His shoes were still worn, but he'd polished them with a damp sock the night before. He sat stiffly in the wooden chair, hands clasped in his lap, eyes fixed on the floor. The officer sat a few feet away. He didn't try to talk to him, just gave him a small, steady look like an anchor. The CPS attorney spoke first. While we appreciate officers' intentions, standard protocol exists for a reason. Group homes provide structure, supervision, and services this child currently lacks. Temporary removal is not punishment, it's protection. Then the officer's lawyer, a quiet woman with silver hair and sharp eyes, stood. She didn't raise her voice. She just laid out the facts. This child has never been reported for theft, aggression, or truancy. He attends school when physically possible. He cares for his mother, despite their circumstances. He demonstrated honesty in a moment when no one was watching. Removing him from his primary caregiver, his only emotional support, risks long-term trauma. Meanwhile, officer has passed all background checks, home inspections, and parenting evaluations. His home is safe, stable, and within the same school zone. This isn't about bending rules. It's about applying compassion within them. The judge asked questions. About the mother's condition. About visitation plans. About how long the arrangement would last. 6 months, the officer said. Renewable, if needed. But the goal is reunification. I'm not trying to replace his mom. I'm trying to give them both time to heal together. Then the judge did something unexpected. She turned to the boy. What do you want? She asked, her voice softer than before. All eyes turned to him. He swallowed hard. His throat felt tight. He looked at the officer, then at the caseworker, then at the floor again. But then he remembered his mom's voice. Speak your truth, even if your voice shakes. He took a breath. I want to stay near my mom, he said, voice barely above a whisper. I don't care where I sleep, I need to know she's okay. The courtroom was silent for a long moment. The judge nodded slowly. Noted. 2 days later, the ruling came down. The officer got the call while sitting in his cruiser during lunch break. He listened, said thank you, Your Honor, and hung up. His hands were shaking. He drove straight to the group home. When the boy saw him walking down the hallway, his eyes widened. The officer didn't say anything at first. Jess handed him a small duffel bag, his old one, now packed with his things, plus a few new ones. You're coming home, the officer said. The boy didn't move. Home? For now? The officer said gently. To my place? Your mom's getting better, and you'll see her soon. Every week? Maybe more. The boy stood slowly, slinging the duffel over his shoulder. He didn't smile, not yet, but something in his eyes lifted. Like a weight had been moved, not gone, but lighter. As they walked out, the staff waved. One woman whispered, Take good care of him. I will, the officer said. Back at his house, a modest 2-bedroom on a quiet street with a small porch and a dogwood tree out front, the boy stood in the doorway. Hesitant. It's okay, the officer said. Come on in. The spare room smelled like fresh laundry and wood polish. A narrow bed with a blue quilt. A desk with a lamp. A bookshelf with a few paperbacks, some about space, some about animals, one about ocean creatures. On the windowsill sat a small potted plant. For you, the officer said. It's a spider plant. Hard to kill. Good for beginners. The boy touched a leaf gently. Thanks. They didn't talk much that first night. The officer made grilled cheese and tomato soup, simple, warm food. They ate at the kitchen table. The house was quiet, but not empty. A clock ticked on the wall. A refrigerator hummed. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked. After dinner, the boy asked, Do I have to call you? Sir. The officer laughed softly. No, just call me what feels right. The boy thought for a moment. Okay. He didn't say anything else, but that night, for the first time in weeks, he slept through the night without waking up. News of the ruling spread quickly. Some people praised the officer, called him a hero, a rare good soul in a broken system. Others criticized him, said he'd overstepped. The cops shouldn't play social worker, that this would set a dangerous precedent. Online debates flared. But in the neighborhood, things felt different. Ms. Lane brought over homemade bread. Rosa from the laundromat left a care package at the door, socks, soap, a coloring book. Even the grocery store manager waved when he saw the officer and the boy walking by one afternoon at school. The boy's teacher pulled him aside. We're glad you're back, she said quietly. And if you ever need anything, lunch, supplies, a quiet place to sit, just let me know. He nodded. Thanks. He still missed his mom. Still woke up some nights reaching for the sound of her breathing. But now there was a plan. A phone call every Sunday. A visit scheduled for the weekend. Slow, careful steps toward something that felt like hope. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching fireflies blink in the dusk, the officer asked, You ever think about what you'll do when you grow up? The boy shrugged. Maybe help people. Like, not in a big way. Just when they need it. The officer smiled. Sounds like a good plan. And in that quiet moment, under a sky full of stars, it didn't matter that the world had once ignored him. It didn't matter that he'd slept under a highway or worn shoes with holes. What mattered was this. He was seen. He was safe. And for the first time in a long time, he believed that doing the right thing, even when it was hard, even when no one was watching, could actually lead somewhere good. Copy winter softened into early spring, and with it came small, quiet changes like buds on the dogwood tree, longer days, and the smell of rain that didn't sting so much. The boy had been living in the spare room for nearly 3 months now. It wasn't forever. It wasn't even a promise of forever, but it was enough for now. He still kept his things neatly folded in the duffel bag, just in case. Old habits didn't vanish overnight, but slowly he'd begun to leave his toothbrush on the bathroom sink. His school folder sat on the desk. His favorite book, The Hidden Life of Trees, rested on the nightstand, spine cracked from being read too many times. These weren't just things. They were signs of something new. Trust school felt different now. Not because the hallways had changed, but because he walked them with a little more ground under his feet. He still didn't talk much, but he raised his hand in science class when they discussed ecosystems. He joined the after-school writing club, mostly because Ms. Lane had mentioned it during one of her visits. "You've got stories in you," she'd said, "even if you don't think they matter." At first, he just listened while the other kids shared poems about crushes or basketball games. But one rainy Tuesday, the teacher asked them to write about a moment that changed everything. He stared at the blank page for a long time. Then he wrote about the wallet. Not the part where he gave it back just the seconds before. When he stood there, wet and hungry, deciding whether to walk away or step forward, he didn't call it brave. He just wrote, "I knew if I didn't do it, I'd feel worse than being cold or hungry. So I did it." Teacher read it quietly after class. Then she said, "This is going in the school newsletter." "With your permission," he nodded. He didn't expect anyone to care. But the next week, a girl from his math class stopped him in the hallway. "I read your piece," she said. "My grandma lost her wallet last year. Someone returned it to—" She cried for an hour. She paused. "Thanks for reminding us that good people are still out there." He didn't know what to say, so he just said, "You're welcome." Back at the house, life settled into a gentle rhythm. Mornings started with scrambled eggs or oatmeal, depending on the day. The officer never pushed him to talk, but he always asked, "How'd school go?" and waited for an answer, even if it was just okay. Evenings were quiet. Sometimes they watched documentaries about oceans or space. Sometimes they just sat on the porch listening to the neighborhood sounds. Kids laughing, car doors slamming, the distant chime of an ice cream truck. The visits with his mom began slowly, just an hour every Sunday at the respite center, where she now had a small room with real sheets and a window that opened. At first she cried every time they hugged. Not sad tears, exactly more like relief spilling out after being held in too long. Her cough had eased. She was on a steady medication plan. And with help from Miss Lane, she'd gotten on a waiting list for transitional housing. During their visits, they didn't talk about the past much. Instead, they played cards, shared stories about their weeks, or just sat side by side watching birds on the fence. One Sunday, she held his hand and said, "I'm so sorry you had to carry so much." He shook his head. "I didn't carry it alone." She smiled, eyes wet again. The officer made sure to drop him off and pick him up every time. He never stayed during the visits, gave them privacy, but he always waited nearby, reading a book in the car or chatting with the front desk nurse. He didn't do it because he had to. He did it because he'd promised. Not everything was perfect. There were still hard nights when the boy woke up from dreams about the overpass, or when he missed his mom so much his chest ached. Nights when he wondered if this was all temporary, if one wrong move would send him back to the group home. On those nights, he'd sit on the porch steps, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the stars. And sometimes, without a word, the officer would join him, handing him a mug of warm milk with honey. And they'd sit in silence until the sky turned gray with dawn. One afternoon, Ms. Lane came by with big news. "They found a spot," she said, sitting at the kitchen table with the officer and the boy. "In a family housing complex downtown, 2 bedrooms. On-site case management. Utilities included for 6 months. Your mom qualifies." The boy's breath caught. "When next week?" she said. "Move-in day is Monday." He didn't jump up or cheer. He just looked at his hands, then at the officer. There was gratitude there, but also fear. What if it didn't work out? What if she got sick again? What if the system changed its mind? The officer saw it. "It's okay to be nervous," he said, "but it's also okay to hope." The week flew by. The boy helped pack his mom's few belongings from the respite, sent her photo album. The lavender soap, the blanket she'd wrapped around him during thunderstorms. On moving day, the officer drove them both, helped carry boxes, and even fixed a wobbly shelf in the new apartment's living room. The place wasn't fancy linoleum floors. Thin walls, a view of a parking lot, but it had a lock on the door, a working stove, and 2 separate beds. To them, it was everything. That night, back at the officer's house, the boy sat on his bed. Staring at the half-packed duffel, he wasn't sure what to feel. Relief? Sadness? Gratitude? So deep it hurt? The officer knocked lightly on the doorframe. "You okay?" The boy nodded, then shook his head. "I don't know how to say thank you." "You don't have to," the officer said, leaning against the door. "But if you ever want to just keep being who you are, honest, kind, that's thanks enough." They didn't talk about the future. Not really. The court arrangement was still active for a few more months, just as a safety net. The officer would still check in. Ms. Lane would still offer support. School would go on. Life would keep moving. But something had shifted, not just in where the boy slept, but in how he saw himself. He wasn't just the kid from under the overpass anymore. He was the boy who returned the wallet. The one who wrote about trees and stars. The one who had people who showed up even when he didn't ask. A few weeks later, his writing piece was accepted into a city youth anthology. The theme was moments that matter. At the small reading event held at the public library, he stood at the podium, hands trembling, and read his short essay aloud. When he finished, the room was quiet for a beat, then filled with soft clapping, not loud or showy, but warm like hands saying, "We hear you." Afterward, a reporter from the local paper approached. "Mind if I ask you a question?" she said gently. He nodded. Double quotes. "What do you want people to understand about kids like you?" He thought for a moment. "That we're still here, even when you don't see us. And that doing the right thing doesn't always fix everything, but it reminds you that you're still you." The officer stood near the back, arms crossed, face unreadable, but his eyes shone. Later, walking home under streetlights, the boy asked, "Do you think anyone will remember this?" "All of it. Maybe not the whole world," the officer said. "But the people who mattered? Yeah, they'll remember." And maybe that was enough. Because real change rarely comes with fanfare. It doesn't need headlines or applause. It starts with one person choosing to see another. With a wallet returned, with a granola bar offered, with a petition filed not for glory, but because it was right. The boy never called the officer dad or guardian or anything formal. He didn't need to. What they had wasn't about titles. It was about showing up. About believing someone deserved better before they even believed it themselves. Now, on spring evenings, if you walked past the family housing complex, you might see a boy sitting on the steps with a notebook writing. Sometimes his mom sits beside him, sipping tea. And sometimes a police cruiser slows as it passes, not stopping, just checking in. A wave is exchanged. A nod. Nothing dramatic. Just 2 people who once crossed paths in a laundromat and chose to walk a little farther together. And in his notebook, the boy has started a new piece. It doesn't have a title yet, but it begins like this. "I used to think kindness was something you gave when you had extra. Now I know it's something you give when you have nothing left, and still choose to care." He doesn't know where the story ends, but for the first time, he's not afraid to find out.